So hello, good afternoon. My apologies for my tardiness, but I am here now. I am Rachel Thorburn, and I'm from Child Welfare. So what I was told we were supposed to talk about was this document, but then I heard other people were like giving some background so you knew who we were. So I tried to do a little bit of that in the last half an hour before I got here. So as soon as we get this up, I will move with you. Okay, so Child Welfare Services. This is my clicker. Yeah. All right, I can just say next slide. That'll work. So we don't, yeah? Okay. Next slide. Okay, so what do we do in Child Welfare Services? A lot of people have a lot of myths about what we do. They think you come and steal children in the night, right? And occasionally that happens, but what we mostly do is keep children safe, and we work to strengthen families to help keep children safe. Those are the main things that we do. Enormous amount of energy in strengthening families to care for their children so that we can keep children safe. And an enormous amount of energy we spend on teaching people how to keep children safe so children can keep safe. So those are the big things that we do. But then if you had to break it down into a more delineated, so child protection, meaning keeping kids safe from people who might hurt them, particularly in the cases of where it's family violence. So a caregiver is harming a child, then child welfare is involved. If it's someone who's not a caregiver, but the caregiver is able to be protective, we don't get involved. If it's not a caregiver, but the caregiver is not being protective, then we are involved. Okay, so that's child protection. And then, wait, no, I didn't say change it. Okay, so then family support and strengthening is we do a lot of energy and working, have a lot of different services going into the homes and working with families, or working with families even if we have a child in foster care, trying to help to teach them the skills that they need to properly care for their children in safe ways. And then also, yeah, we do have foster care, that's what we're mostly known for, but that's not the only thing we do. We do keep children in foster care, and that relates to the sixth, which is we license homes to be the resource homes where children stay. We also are involved if a child can't go back to their family of origin, then we move toward adoption, so we're involved in adoption. And also, for children who are not going to be able to find a permanent home, we work on teaching them independent living skills so that they will thrive as young adults and on into adulthood. So those are the things that we do. Next slide. Okay, structure. This is a little bit boring, but I know a lot of people can't think about a state program without knowing where it fits in the world, right? So I'm going to quickly tell you. It looks like child welfare is the center of the universe in this slide because for this purpose of this talk, it is. So we're part of the Department of Human Services, not the Department of Health, right? And in some states, health and human services are together. Federally, health and human services are together. In the state of Hawaii, they are not. You have the Department of Health, you have separately the Department of Human Services. This is a structure of the Department of Human Services. So only one division, Social Services Division, has child welfare as one part of it. The other divisions, they're all in acronyms there, but I wrote it down at the bottom, not that you can read that, but so on your far left is MedQuest, right? MedQuest Division. And then just next to that is Benefit, Employment, and Support Services Division. What's that? That's like public assistance. So that's TANF and SNAP and food stamp stuff. Monetary welfare, welfare, not the child welfare as in child protective services, but the other kind of welfare. That's in the BESD. And then the next one is Vocational Rehabilitation and Services for the Blind Division. I think that's self-explanatory from the name, but you can ask me if you want to know. And then the other things are Public Housing Authority, and then the Office of Youth Services, the Commission for Status of Women, and the Commission on Fatherhood. And then the rest of it is Social Services Division. And all of it isn't child welfare as much as we kind of think of it. Oh, child welfare, social services. The other part on the far left, that's adult. That's the Adult and Community Care Services branch. So they work with vulnerable adults, usually seniors who are being potentially abused or neglected. So similar child welfare, but on the adult side. That's why we're together in one division. And then over here is all of our support stuff, like our contracting and our training services and stuff. That supports the two branches. Okay, so not that exciting, but I know for some people you need to know that in order to like move on. Where do you fit child welfare? Okay, next slide. Now I'm not going to go into this in detail, but this is child welfare broken down. So basically we're broken down, we have separate sections. There are 8 sections total. So there are 4 on Oahu, and then there's on the Big Island, there's an East Hawaii section, and the other side, West Hawaii section. There's a Maui section that covers Maui County, all of Maui County, and Kauai section that covers Kauai County. And then you see, I'll explain the Oahu ones in a second because they're a little bit tricky, but off to the side on the top, that's where I work, which is in our program development office. So we're like off to the side, we're not in one of the sections, and we're not just doing the direct branch operation stuff. So where I work in, we do the program development and policy work off to the side, statewide for everybody and everything. Now Oahu's a little weird, so all the other ones are broken up by geographic region, but Oahu is not. It used to be that we had sections that just served West Oahu or East Oahu, so they might be referred to by those names, but it has nothing to do with what they actually do, because they can serve anyone on any part of the island. And it's broken up, some of it is geographic, but Oahu Section 3 doesn't do any direct services, so they have the 2 statewide intake units, and they have our resource home licensing unit. So resource homes, resource caregivers, those are the same as foster homes and foster families. And then we have payments, our payment stuff for federal claiming, yeah, that's in there too. But and also in Oahu Section 1, we have what we call special services, but what that is sex abuse. So we have specialized sex abuse investigation and case management units in the same section. For Oahu, it's separate. For all of the other islands, they do everything because the case numbers are small. But for Oahu, they separate out the sex abuse because of the special skills that it can sometimes use. And then the other 2, Section 2 and Section 4 on Oahu, are generalized. All the units do both investigation and case management permanency. And I'll say what that is in a minute. Okay, next slide. Okay, so brief of the case flow, how things work in child welfare. So basically a call comes into our child welfare hotline, 24 hours, any time of the day or night, any holiday, there's always someone to answer the phone. And then they do an assessment of what's going on. They gather as much information as they possibly can from the caller, and then they make a determination of what should happen next. And then there are 1 through 5 under the hotline are different options of what could happen next. But number 5 is they write it down and they don't do anything. Like someone tells them, I heard some screaming, and they just I don't know exactly where it was from, and they say, okay, can you give me anything else? They don't have enough to actually send someone out or do anything. They'll record it, they'll give, the approximate information, and they'll put it in the system, but nothing will happen from that. And a lot of people will call asking for information, but if it's not that, the other options are, I'm gonna get to one last actually, but one is that there's a safety concern identified in the home that the child is maybe harmed very soon, and then those cases are assigned to our Child Welfare Services investigation. Now, if they use their tools, our intake workers, and they realize there's a risk, but there's no safety issue, and the risk is moderate to high, that case will be referred to what we call voluntary case management, and we contract out separate private nonprofit agencies. We have contracts with them statewide to take these cases that they're moderate to high risk, but it doesn't rise to the level that we need child welfare to definitely be involved. And they have workers that are trained, and they go out and go into those homes and work with those people to try to strengthen the family. So hopefully the case does not come to child welfare. If our intake workers assess that the case has some risk, but it's on the lower end, then they refer the case to Family Strengthening Services, which is, and it's just like the voluntary case management. We have contracts throughout the state where we send, these are nonprofit community-based agencies that have trained workers, and they go out and work with the families to strengthen the families so hopefully they never come to child welfare. Now, our investigators, number two, our state workers, child welfare investigators, they go out and they gather information, and they have to make a determination whether the allegations of abuse or neglect should be confirmed or not confirmed, and what to do about it. And when they go out, a child welfare investigator goes out, they can make a determination to take a child into foster care or not, right? Makes sense? And okay, then I'm gonna go back to the top one, because that's our newest, and that's CRT, I didn't write it up, but it stands for Crisis Response Team. And this is our newest thing, and it exists all over Oahu, and it just started on the Big Island. And what that is if we get a call from the police or a hospital, and they're about to take a child into foster care, then we will send out a worker who will go out within 2 hours and immediately assess the case and try to figure out what needs to happen. And the idea behind that is to try to keep as many children out of care as possible who might not need to come into care otherwise. Because sometimes, let's say a police officer finds a kid wandering in the mall who's 6, right? That's dangerous. A 6-year-old should not be wandering the mall without a parent. So they would call child welfare, and in the past, the old system, we would send out not a social worker sort, but an aide or an assistant who would take that kid and bring them to a foster home. And then the investigator would go out the next day, interview the kid, find the parents, and figure out what needed to happen. But with our new system, we have a social level worker go out immediately and be able to figure out the situation, make calls, assess the situation, and hopefully that 6-year-old doesn't need to come into foster care. We can find a caregiver who, maybe the child wandered off and the parent is frantically looking for that child, and there has been no abuse or neglect, possibly. So that's just one example, but the idea of the crisis response team is that we will be able to keep more children out of care safely. We won't have to traumatize kids by coming to care who might be able to go home in just a few days. Maybe they never had to come in at all. And preliminary results of the first 6 months numbers are really, really good, but we're still in the beginning stages. Okay, so that's what happens when at the beginning, how it comes in, and then what can happen. Once it comes in to investigation, if they investigate and they're like, oh, this is not that big a deal, nothing really happened, I'm not that concerned, they can just close the case. Or the investigator, the child welfare investigator, can then refer the case to one of those 2 other levels, the voluntary case management or the family strengthening services. There were options up above. They can do that then, say, oh, I have some concerns, but it's not that serious. I think it doesn't have to be child welfare that serves the family. Someone else can serve the family. So they can refer it to one of those other 2 levels. And then the other option is if the child can come into foster care, and then we keep the case and we do case management with the case, and we try to get that child back to his or her family, or if that's not possible, to another permanency. I didn't put on here, but it is an option. We can keep a case open without a child being in foster care. By we, I mean child welfare. So if it's a very high risk situation and we're really concerned, and we don't want to put it on one of our other agencies, our sister agencies that we contract with, we can petition the court for what's called family supervision, where we have to carefully watch the family in case they might need foster care. So that does happen, but it's not a huge number of cases. Usually what happens is a case might come into foster care, and then in court we might send the child home under family supervision and then watch the family for several months before we get out of the way. But it sometimes happens that at the beginning we have a lot of concerns, but not so much we have to take the child in. But those are rarer cases. So I simplified the system here for you. Okay, next slide. Okay, so then when we used to call case management after the investigative stage, but another thing that we call it now is permanency, to have the idea that we're moving as soon as the case comes from investigation, you're immediately thinking about where is this child going to go long term. We immediately, right away, we're not like, oh, what do we do with the case? What services are needed? How can we get this kid? Because the idea is children's timelines are not the same as adults, right? They're aging. I have to move quickly. Okay, so we want to get them back to their families, reunified, or adopted, or to a legal guardianship home, which is just not quite adoption, but still close to permanency. Or if they're going to stay in our system and they can't find anybody, if they age out, which is called emancipation at age 18, we have a new program that we can extend their voluntarily in a version of foster custody until they're 21 so they can get additional services. Okay, moving on, next slide. Okay, what you really care about, data. So we have a huge push to place children with family or relatives. So even when we take them into foster care, to minimize the trauma, we want to place them as much as possible with people that they know. So this is a graph, right? It has state fiscal years along the bottom, so you're watching time. And the blue is the percentage of children in care that are placed with relatives, and the red is non-relatives. And you say, oh yeah, that's awesome, it's going in the right direction. The percentage of kids that are being placed with relatives is increasing, and the non-relatives is decreasing, and that is largely due to the efforts of our staff searching for relatives, doing a lot of family finding, and also our staff can go out the very same day you take a child into foster care, you can in that same day, within hours, do a preliminary license with a relative so they never have to go to a stranger placement. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is about the number of children in foster care, and we have time along the bottom. So it goes from state fiscal year 2007 to state fiscal year 2013. And the blue bar is the number of children in care, okay? And then the red is the number of children that entered, and the yellow is the number of children that exited. So you realize that if the number of children that exited is higher than they entered, then the number's gonna go down the following year, right? Okay, because people are exiting at a higher rate than they're entering, the numbers are gonna go down. And then when they start getting to be the same, it levels off, unsurprisingly. But the really amazing thing is that we've been able to reduce the number of children in foster care safely, because we have a lot of data that we look at about, are they re-entering care, is there re-harm to the children, are they coming in and getting these other services, and that's not happening, meaning that we've been able to reduce the number of children in care safely over this period. And remember, over this period of time, of course, the population in Hawaii has increased, which makes it even more beautiful and exciting and wonderful data. So, okay, next slide. This is about placement stability. So when a child, there's maybe a myth that when children are in foster care, they move around a lot, that you hear stories or things in the news about a child being in 17 foster homes in 5 years or something. And although that occasionally happens, it is definitely not what's really happening with the majority of kids. So this says, these are the percentages of kids in these years that had no more than 2 placements in the year. So we're getting better and better and better, and the last time that this is for, that basically 90% of the kids that are in care are not experiencing more than 2 placements. Maybe they came into a first placement and had to move to another, but not more than that. And we have been better than the national standard for, since 2008, so that's very exciting. There are other slides here, but given the time, I just put those, I touched on the data that you care about most because it's in this document. I want to make sure that got explained. And then I added in a bunch of data that we will not talk about so that other people have a chance to share.